German U-boat crew mocked the new Allied escort planes until they were caught in a 10-minute kill zone, October 1943. In the freezing Atlantic night, a U-boat captain keyed his radio. Convoy in sight, easy pickings. But above the waves came thunder, the juggernaut of 8 50-caliber guns diving from 30,000 feet. He glanced at the periscope. Then he dropped deep, and the convoy kept going. In late 1943, the German Kriegsmarine's U-boat crews believed they had the Atlantic convoys under control. But the introduction of coordinated P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers acting as convoy protectors blunted their wolf packs. The first wave of attacks ended with U-boats being targeted not by ships, but by dive-bombing fighters, creating an unexpected shift in anti-submarine warfare. Mocking the sky. The old rules of the hunt have just changed. October 22, 1943, 04:10 hours. Depth, 80 meters. Inside the U-boat, every breath tastes of oil and sweat. The air grows thick, heavy with fear. Condensation drips from the ceiling pipes like cold rain. In the red glow of emergency lighting, the faces of 30 men gleam with anxiety. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Meyer grips the periscope column, staring at nothing. The hum of the electric motors fills the silence. The soundman breaks it. Herr Kapitän, they've gone quiet. I hear only the convoy now. Meyer exhales slowly. Surface again when we're clear. No one dares question him. The men resume their stations, working in whispers. A few share nervous glances, as if afraid that even their eyes might make noise. In the radio compartment, Erich Vogel adjusts the dials. Static hisses through his headset. Then, faint, crackling English chatter. He stiffens. Sir, radio traffic, Allied frequency, aircraft call signs. Meyer turns sharply. What range? Unknown, but strong. That word, strong, cuts deeper than the roar of any engine. If he can hear them clearly, the enemy is close. Meyer straightens, his jaw tight. Record the signal, then silence all transmissions. Not a whisper out of this boat. He glances toward the crew and forces a calm smile. It was one patrol plane. They got lucky. We'll dive deep, then resurface after dawn. The Atlantic is still ours. Hans Klein, the youngest aboard, mutters under his breath, planes in the middle of the ocean. It's witchcraft. Another sailor laughs, brittle and forced. Soon they'll drop flying destroyers, eh? The laughter catches on. Nervous, but laughter all the same. Meyer joins in, voice low. Let them drop what they like. We are the wolves. The sea is our home. But in truth, something unsettles him. He has hunted convoys for 2 years, from Norway to the Azores. He knows what ships sound like, what sonar pings mean. Yet this was different. The attack came from above, silent until the moment of impact. He thinks of the old U-boat saying, "There are no planes at night." Apparently, someone forgot to tell the Allies. 4:45 hours, 12,000 feet above the convoy. Lieutenant Robert Buzz Miller wipes frost from the inside of his canopy. The Atlantic wind buffets his Thunderbolt like a living thing. Below, the convoy stretches in a ragged line, ships glowing faintly in blackout mode. He radios to the others. Eagle 1 to flight. Stay tight. Keep scanning the surface. If they're down there, they'll have to breathe sooner or later. The voice of his wingman, Lieutenant Fred Harris, crackles through the headset. Hard to believe they're still this bold, Buzz. I mean, who surfaces under air cover? Buzz chuckles. Arrogance is a hell of a drug, Fred. The British controller aboard HMS Activity cuts in. Eagle Flight, this is Control. Long-range radar marks intermittent contacts west of Convoy Charlie. Could be stragglers, could be shadows. Stay sharp. Buzz adjusts his throttle and peers down at the gray expanse. Somewhere below, a man like him listens to the hum of his engines and prays they'll pass. He wonders what it feels like to be hunted underwater, to hear death above you, to have nowhere to run. Below, depth, 110 meters. The pressure is rising. U-282 groans as if in pain. The chief engineer checks the gauges, whispering to himself. She'll hold, she'll hold. Meyer crouches beside him. How long can we stay this deep? 2 hours at most before battery drain. Good. Then we wait. They'll get bored, fly home. A pause. Somewhere aft, a pipe groans. The hull trembles, then steadies again. Hans Klein bites his lip, staring at the condensation dripping from the ceiling. He whispers a prayer his mother taught him before he left Hamburg. Protect us from the storm above and the sea below. When the U-boat finally rises to periscope depth, dawn is breaking. A pale blue glow filters through the glass as the periscope lifts. Meyer adjusts the lens. The sea is calm. No ships in sight. No planes. Surface the boat. Compressed air hisses. The U-boat breaks the surface, water cascading off its sides. The conning tower opens, letting in the cold Atlantic air. Men gulp it greedily. Meyer climbs up, scanning the horizon. Nothing but mist and endless water. He exhales in relief. They're gone. Vogel joins him, handing over the radio log. No transmissions detected in the last hour. Good. Meyer lowers his binoculars. Bring up the diesel engines. We'll make for the convoy again. Tonight, we strike. The men cheer quietly, their confidence returning. Someone jokes about ghost planes. Someone else whistles a victory tune. Meyer smiles, though his eyes remain wary. He stares at the empty sky. Planes over the Atlantic, he mutters. If they exist, they won't find us twice. 120 miles east, aboard HMS Activity. Captain James Burnett studies a map littered with pins. His officers crowd around. U-boat transmission picked up again, the signals officer reports. Intercept suggests U-282. They're repositioning. Burnett nods grimly. They think we're gone. Let's prove them wrong. He turns to the communications desk. Signal Eagle flight. Begin hunt pattern Delta. Within minutes, the P-47s roar off the carrier deck again, gliding low over the Atlantic. The trap is set. The wolves are being hunted now, and this time they won't see death coming from above. The hunt begins. October 22nd, 1943, North Atlantic, 300 miles southwest of Ireland. The sea is black glass under a quarter moon. Waves lap quietly against the hull of U-282 as it glides at periscope depth, running silent. Inside the cramped command room, the air smells of diesel, sweat, and old metal. A single red bulb casts the crew's faces in ghostly glow. Oberleutnant Zerzay. Wolfgang Meyer peers through the periscope. His gloves squeak faintly against the cold brass handles. Convoy ahead, he whispers, voice tight with anticipation. Bearing 160. Distance, 4,000 meters. The sonar operator confirms. Faint propeller beats, steady, rhythmic, many of them. Merchant ships, easy prey. Meyer straightens, cracking a grin. For 6 weeks, they've prowled these waters without a single confirmed kill. Now, at last, they've found meat on the line. He signals to the chief engineer. Prepare tubes 1 and 2. Target the lead freighter. Engines hum softly as compressed air hisses into the torpedo tubes. The men move with practiced precision, their faces calm. They've done this dozens of times. Meyer leans toward the navigator. We'll shadow them until dawn. Then we strike. The navigator nods, adjusting the chart on the plotting table. Pencil lines trace the convoy's course northeast toward Liverpool. U-282 will cut across its flank like a wolf in the dark. Behind them, the North Atlantic rolls endlessly, cold and indifferent. For months, the U-boats of the Kriegsmarine have terrorized these routes. Convoys burn in the night, and Allied sailors whisper of gray wolves lurking beneath the waves. German radio broadcasts boast of unbroken control of the Atlantic. The men aboard U-282 believe it. They also believe in their own invincibility. Allied planes, mere rumors. Out here, 1,000 kilometers from land, what could reach them? Inside the officers' mess, a young sailor named Hans Klein pours coffee thick as tar into tin mugs. He grins at his comrade, radio man Eric Vogel. "Have you heard, Eric? The British are so desperate they've sent fighters over the ocean now." "Fighters? They think we'll come up and let them shoot us like ducks." Vogel chuckles, tapping the radio set. "Maybe they'll fly out on broomsticks, too." Laughter ripples through the compartment. Meyer joins in. "Let them come. The Atlantic is ours." He raises his mug. "To the hunt." Above them, invisible against the stars, the convoy moves steadily eastward. 60 merchant ships escorted by destroyers and corvettes. Somewhere within the gray cloud of ships, sonar pings search for predators below. But the U-boat's hull is quiet steel, its heartbeat hidden in the dark. At 02:17 hours, the hydrophone operator stiffens. "Herr Kapitän, new sound, high frequency, very high." Meyer frowns. "Aircraft?" The man shrugs. "Could be interference." Meyer waves it off. "Ignore it. Stay on course." Outside, a faint vibration ripples through the water. Propellers, not of ships, but of planes slicing low across the ocean. Far above, 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts cut through a bank of clouds. Their engines roar against the cold wind, condensation trailing from their wings. They belong to the 78th Fighter Group, newly assigned to experimental long-range convoy escort duty. Their fuel tanks are swollen beneath the wings, extra barrels bolted on for endurance. In the lead cockpit, Lieutenant Robert Buzz Miller scans the sea below. The horizon glows faintly where moonlight catches the convoy wakes. His voice crackles through the radio. "Convoy Charlie sighted, escorts confirmed, no bogies visible." From the carrier HMS Activity, Captain James Burnett responds. "Copy, Buzz. Maintain cover pattern Bravo. If you spot any periscopes, mark and dive." Buzz acknowledges, banking his P-47 in a slow arc. He watches the cold Atlantic glitter beneath him and wonders if the enemy truly lurks there, waiting. He's never fought a submarine before. His .50 caliber guns are meant for aircraft and trains, not shadows underwater. But the briefing was clear. U-boats have been surfacing at night to attack, confident no plane could reach them. Tonight, that changes. Back below, U-282 drifts silently on battery power. The crew eats in shifts, the low hum of the electric motors lulling them into false calm. In the control room, condensation beads along the pipes. At Aero 340, the sonar pings again. The operator's eyes widen. "Herr Kapitän, something's moving above us." Meyer frowns. "A destroyer?" He listens. A deeper, rhythmic roar. Not a ship, something faster. He grips the periscope and raises it cautiously. Through the lens, he catches a fleeting shape against the stars. Wings. His heart stutters. "What is that?" The shape flashes again, this time closer. Twin rows of orange sparks streak downward. Tracers. Meyer slams the dive alarm. "Alarm! Dive! Schnell!" Klaxons wail. Men scramble, slamming hatches, securing valves. U-282 tilts nose down. Outside, bullets rake the water's surface, carving white scars through the sea. The thunder above is deafening. Inside, the crew grips rails as the sub plunges. Meyer's voice echoes through the hull. "Planes! They have planes out here!" At 40 meters depth, silence returns, except for the groan of the hull under pressure and the pounding of hearts. Meyer wipes sweat from his brow. The laughter from earlier dies completely. He stares at the depth gauge and whispers to himself, "Impossible. They can't fly this far." Above, Lieutenant Miller circles once more, scanning the oil slick where bullets struck the surface. "I think we spooked one," he radios. Burnett replies, "Good. Keep them under. 10-minute window before they resurface. Welcome to the new Atlantic, boys." The old rules of the hunt have just changed. Wings over the Atlantic. October 17th, 1943. RAF Metfield Air Base, Suffolk, England. Morning frost clung to the metal skin of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolts lined up on the runway. Mechanics in oil-stained overalls worked fast, their breath visible in the biting wind. The sound of clanging tools mixed with the low rumble of radial engines being tested. Captain Edward "Red" Harkins, commander of the 56th Fighter Group's new long-range detachment, adjusted his flight gloves and studied the sky. "The Atlantic's waiting," he muttered, as the ground crew loaded auxiliary fuel tanks under his wings. A modification that would extend the Thunderbolt S reach hundreds of miles west, over the dark ocean where U-boats hunted. Until recently, Allied convoys had sailed blind between the reach of coastal air patrols, a vast mid-Atlantic gap where U-boats struck with impunity. Crews called it the Black Pit. But now, in late 1943, the Allies had found a way to bring the sky to that void. The innovation was simple, but transformative. Escort carriers and long-range aircraft flying in overlapping patrols, coordinated by new radar guidance, the once invincible wolf packs would now find that the sky itself had teeth. Harkins climbed into his cockpit, pulling down his oxygen mask. "Command says the U-boats are massing around convoy on 207, his radio crackled. "You'll be flying top cover at 15,000 feet. If you see anything, you don't wait for orders. You dive." He nodded. The canopy slid shut. A moment later, the engine roared to life, its propeller slicing the mist into ribbons. As the formation lifted off, the British coast fell away beneath them, fields fading into waves. The pilots had trained for this moment for months, learning to navigate featureless skies over featureless seas. There were no landmarks, no place to hide if the weather turned, only the endless Atlantic and the men below who depended on them. Far out at sea, the U-boat captains had no idea the rules had changed. They still believed air cover vanished once a convoy passed 500 miles from shore. U-590's commander, Oberleutnant Ernst Kellner, leaned over the chart table. His second officer reported that the convoy's bearing had been confirmed. "We surface at dusk," Kellner said confidently. "No escorts can reach this far." He was wrong. At that very moment, the radar operator aboard Harkins' lead plane picked up faint returns, small metallic echoes on the sea surface. "Possible contact, bearing 215, Harkins banked left. "Let's take a look." The Thunderbolts descended through low-lying clouds, engines thundering. Below, the silver-gray Atlantic stretched forever, dappled by moonlight and waves. Then the shape appeared, a thin, dark line cutting across the water. "Submarine on the surface!" Kellner heard it too, the growing hum of engines above. He ran to the periscope and looked up. "Impossible," he whispered. "No aircraft should be here. Alarm! Crash dive!" But it was too late. The first Thunderbolt streaked overhead, releasing two 500-pound depth bombs. They hit the water meters from the U-boat's hull, exploding in white fountains. The shockwaves slammed through the conning tower, shattering instruments and lights. From the air, the pilots watched the ocean erupt. "That's a hit! That's a damn hit!" one shouted over the radio. Below, Kellner's crew struggled to seal the hatches. Water poured through ruptured seams. "We can't hold depth!" cried the chief engineer. Kellner grabbed the chart, now soaked with seawater. "Blow ballast! Surface again!" As the U-boat broke through the waves, smoke pouring from her vents, another formation of P-47s swooped in. Their 50-caliber guns stitched lines of fire across the conning tower. Kellner stumbled to the bridge, eyes burning from smoke. For the first time, he saw them clearly. The wide-winged fighters marked with white stars, the thunder in their engines echoing across the sky. "The sky," he muttered, half laughing, half terrified. "They've brought the damn sky to the Atlantic." Hours later, after the sea had swallowed U-590, Harkins circled back toward the convoy. The merchant ships below formed a slow-moving line of lights on the horizon, still intact, still sailing. His wingman's voice came through, low and awed. "We actually did it, Red. We hunted them. In their own hunting grounds." Harkins smiled beneath his mask. "Yeah, let's make sure they never forget it." In Berlin, Admiral Karl Dönitz read the latest intercepts with disbelief. Several U-boats lost in a single night, not to destroyers, not to depth charges, but to aircraft operating hundreds of miles from shore. His aides whispered about new long-range fighters and air traps. Dönitz slammed his fist on the desk. "Find out how they reach that far," he ordered. But deep down, he already knew. The Allies had changed the game. The wolves were no longer the hunters. They were being hunted. The ambush, October 18th, 1943. Mid-Atlantic, 500 miles west of Ireland. The storm had passed, but the sea was still restless, a rolling graveyard of gray swells. Convoy on 207 pressed on, 30 merchant ships in tight formation, smoke trailing low across the horizon. Escort destroyers zigzagged on the perimeter, radar antennas sweeping the night. Inside the cramped control room of U-405, Kapitän-Leutnant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann adjusted his periscope. The glass was fogged with condensation. His breath left clouds against the lens. "Convoy, bearing 085, speed 6 knots. His voice was calm, almost casual. The younger crewmen exchanged grins. They'd been tracking the convoy for hours, stalking it from the shadows. "The British won't expect us here," one whispered. "The last attack wiped out their escorts." Hauptmann smirked. "And the Luftwaffe says the skies are clear tonight. No patrols. We go in close, 1 torpedo spread, then dive." No one noticed the faint, rhythmic beeping from the U-boat's passive sonar. It wasn't a destroyer. Too high-pitched, too fast. Something new. Something above. 02:17 hours. Far overhead, under a thin veil of clouds, Captain Edward Red Harkins and his P-47 flight held a silent formation. They'd taken off from an escort carrier hours earlier, guided by new shipborne radar that could track surfaced submarines even in darkness. "Red leader to Falcon flight," Harkins whispered into his mic. "Convoy confirmed. We're 30 miles east. Maintain altitude until signal flare." In the darkness, the sea was invisible. The only lights were faint beacons on the convoy, tiny, trembling dots swallowed by fog. Below, a flare burst from one of the escort destroyers. The signal. A U-boat had been spotted. "Falcon flight. Arm bombs and dive to 10,000. Let's give them hell." The Thunderbolts rolled into a steep descent, engines screaming. The ocean rushed up like a wall of black glass. Hauptmann was raising the periscope again when the first roar hit. He froze. "Engines! Aircraft!" Before anyone could react, the first bomb exploded 50 meters off the port side. The U-boat rocked violently, throwing men against steel walls. Tools and maps rained from the shelves. "Alarm! Dive! Schnell! Schnell!" Crewmen scrambled down ladders, sealing the hatch above. Water poured through the vents. Hauptmann clung to the railing, shouting, "Depth 40 meters! Level her out!" But the second detonation came almost instantly. A near-perfect hit. The shockwave ripped through the ballast tanks. Lights flickered and died. The sound of metal shrieking filled the dark. Above the chaos, the air battle was already unfolding. Tracer fire tore across the night, bright orange lines slicing through the fog. The P-47s banked in wide arcs, their machine guns roaring as they strafed the surface. "2 confirmed hits!" a pilot yelled. Harkins dove again, barely clearing the mast of a merchant ship. "Keep pressure on them! Don't let them surface!" He could see the flashes of explosions reflecting off the waves, each detonation a fleeting bloom of white light against black water. Then, through the smoke, a new threat appeared. Another periscope breaking the surface just off the convoy's flank. Harkins cursed. "There's another one! Falcon 2, on me!" Below, in U-758, Oberleutnant Werner Hauser watched the carnage unfold on the hydrophone. The sea vibrated with shock waves and machine gun fire. He couldn't see the attackers, but he heard everything. The shriek of propellers, the thud of bombs, the metallic echo of death. "Sir," his sonar man said, voice shaking. "Multiple aircraft. I count at least 5. Hauser frowned. "That's impossible. We're beyond their range." He surfaced cautiously, hoping to confirm. The hatch opened, letting in the biting cold and the impossible sight above, fighters circling like vultures, their silhouettes cutting across the moon. He didn't have time to give the order. The sky erupted again. From the cockpit, Harkins watched one of the submarines roll sideways and vanish beneath the surface, leaving a trail of oil. He didn't cheer. He'd seen enough of war to know what that meant. But then, over the radio, "Red Leader, we've got movement on radar. Multiple contacts, 10 miles west." The convoy was still under threat. The wolf pack hadn't come alone. "Copy that," Harkins said grimly. "Falcon flight, regroup. We're not done yet." As the planes climbed back into the clouds, the ocean below was a canvas of fire, burning oil, wreckage, the faint glow of lifeboats. At dawn, the sea calmed. The convoy steamed on, battered but intact. The destroyers picked up survivors, German sailors, oil-stained and shivering, eyes hollow with disbelief. One young U-boat radio man looked up at the British sailors who pulled him aboard. "We were told no aircraft could reach this far," he whispered. "No one said the sky could hunt us here." The officer simply nodded. "It can now." In Berlin, reports flooded in. Another night of catastrophic losses. Dönitz stared at the figures. 6 U-boats sunk in a single engagement. His staff waited for orders, but he said nothing. Only one sentence escaped his lips, quiet and heavy. "The Atlantic is no longer ours." The era of the wolf packs was ending, and the ambush they once perfected had turned against them. The kill zone. October 19th, 1943, 04:20 hours, mid-Atlantic. A fog like wet steel hung low over the convoy. The sea was eerily calm now, almost reflective, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Beneath that mirror lay a scene of chaos, wreckage, oil slicks, and the fading echoes of explosions that had thundered through the night. High above, the last of Harkins' Thunderbolts cruised in loose formation, their fuel gauges perilously low. The pilots were exhausted, their voices crackling through static-filled radios. "Falcon lead to base. We've driven them off. Returning to carrier." But even as Harkins spoke, his radar operator cut in sharply. "Sir, new contact. Single blip, closing fast. Looks like another U-boat, directly below the convoy." Harkins' gloved hand tightened on the stick. "We're not leaving yet." Below, in the cold belly of the Atlantic, U-621 was preparing for one last strike. Her commander, Kapitänleutnant Otto Kruger, was an old wolf, a veteran of 12 patrols. He had seen the Kriegsmarine's triumphs and its slow decline, but tonight he smelled an opportunity. "The others were careless," he growled. "They surfaced too soon. We stay deep, move under the convoy, and fire from below." His chief engineer nodded. "Torpedoes ready, tubes 1 and 2 loaded." Kruger listened to the creaks of the hull, the rhythmic heartbeat of the diesels fading as they switched to silent running. The sonar pinged softly, the sound of propellers above, dozens of them. He smiled grimly, like sheep in a pen. He couldn't see it, but the net was already closing. On the surface, destroyer HMS Dianthus had picked up the faint sonar trace of U-621's approach. The operator's voice trembled with excitement. "Contact bearing 260, depth 150 meters and rising." The captain gave a sharp nod. "Bring her about. Full speed. Signal the air escort. We're flushing him out." A flare shot into the gray morning sky, a white streak bursting into bright light. It was the signal Harkins had been waiting for. "Falcon flight, Titan formation. We're going hunting one last time." The Thunderbolts dropped through the clouds, engines roaring as they dived toward the convoy. The sea glimmered below, dotted with dark shapes, destroyers wheeling in tight circles like predators circling prey. Kruger saw the depth gauge ticking upward. 50 meters, 40, ready tubes." His plan was perfect. Slip between 2 cargo ships, fire, and dive again. But perfection lasts seconds in war. Above him, Dianthus released a pattern of depth charges, a perfect fan of steel drums tumbling into the deep. Kruger had a single heartbeat to react before the ocean erupted. The first detonation hit like a giant's fist. Instruments shattered. Pipes burst. A second, closer explosion hurled men against bulkheads. Water sprayed from cracked seams. The lights flickered red, then went dark. "Emergency blow! Surface, damn it!" Kruger screamed. U-621 broke through the surface like a wounded beast, oil and smoke billowing from her vents. The moment she appeared, the sky unleashed fury. Harkin's Thunderbolts descended from 10,000 feet, forming a deadly spiral over the submarine. The lead plane's 8 50-caliber guns opened fire, stitching molten lines across the deck. "Hit confirmed!" shouted his wingman. Kruger stumbled onto the conning tower, blood on his face, his cap torn away. "Flak guns! Fire! Fire! Fire!" The U-boat's 20mm cannon spat defiance into the air, but it was hopeless. Another P-47 screamed down in a dive, releasing 2 depth bombs that struck just off the bow. The explosion lifted the submarine from the water and slammed it back down in a geyser of flame and steel. For 10 minutes, the sea was a cauldron, roaring engines above, deafening detonations below. The air stank of cordite and burning oil. This was no hunt. This was execution. When the smoke cleared, U-621 was gone. The sea boiled with debris, twisted metal, floating wood, a few oil-slicked survivors clinging to life. Harkins circled once, lowering altitude. He could see a man waving from the wreckage, his face blackened with soot. Kruger, somehow alive, shouted up at the sky, voice hoarse with disbelief. "So this is how it ends, trapped between the sea and the sun." Harkins didn't fire again. He just watched, silent, heavy-hearted, as destroyers moved in to pick up survivors. The engagement was over in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes that changed everything. By dawn, radio reports confirmed it. 3 U-boats destroyed, 2 more crippled, not a single ship lost. The Atlantic kill zone, as the pilots called it, had worked flawlessly. On the flight back, Harkins removed his headset and leaned back in exhaustion. "That's it," he murmured. "The wolves are done." Hours later, in a gray office in Lorient, Admiral Donitz stood before a map riddled with red pins, each marking a lost U-boat. His staff officers waited in silence. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "They turned our hunting ground into a killing ground." No one answered. There was nothing left to say. From that day forward, the North Atlantic was no longer ruled by the hunters beneath, but by the guardians above. The ocean had changed sides. Below, crush depth. October 19th, 1943. 05 hours. The Atlantic was quiet again, that strange, dreadful silence that only follows a storm of steel. Smoke drifted across the waves in oily ribbons. Pieces of wreckage floated among the white caps. A boot, a chart tube, a torn life jacket marked Kriegsmarine. The sun was only a pale smear behind the clouds. Beneath that surface, however, one last U-boat still lived. U-997, under the command of Oberleutnant Karl Meissner, had gone deep, far deeper than they were ever meant to go. Inside the pressure hull, lights flickered red, pipes hissed. The deck was slick with condensation. Every man aboard knew the truth. One more depth charge, and the sea would crush them like an eggshell. "Depth, 260 meters, the helmsman called out, voice trembling. "Hold her steady," Meissner replied. His tone was calm, measured, the voice of a man fighting both the enemy and his own fear. They had been running silent for nearly an hour. The shockwaves from the previous attack still echoed through the steel. One of the stern torpedo tubes had collapsed inward. The aft section was flooded. The sonar operator pressed his headset tighter, listening. "Sir, multiple destroyers above us. They're pinging. I count 4. Meissner's face hardened. "We can't outpace them. We go lower." The engineer turned sharply. Herr Oberleutnant, the hull isn't rated for that depth. Meissner cut him off. Neither is drowning. The diving planes tilted. The submarine groaned as it descended further into the black. 270 meters, 280, 290. The crew could hear it, the groaning chorus of strained metal, the moaning of bolts under pressure. The hull seemed to breathe, creak, and whisper around them. Someone began to pray softly. Another man clutched a photograph of his wife. Above, the destroyers continued their deadly ballet. From the bridge of HMS Dianthus, the sonar operator called out, "Contact still descending, range closing. He's trying to go below crush depth." The captain shook his head. "Desperate move. Keep pinging. They'll crack before we do." Depth charges tumbled from the rails again, slicing through the water like black meteors. Inside U-997, the first blast came from above and aft. The shockwave slammed the hull. Lights went out, plunging the crew into darkness. Screams echoed as gauges shattered. "Damage in the aft compartment," shouted the engineer. "Bulkhead leaking. We're taking water." Meissner's hand found the emergency lamp, its beam cutting through the haze. "Seal the compartment! Do it now!" The order meant condemning 3 men trapped behind the door. They looked at him through the porthole, faces pale, desperate. Meissner hesitated only a second, then turned the wheel. The metal door locked with a clang. The pounding stopped soon after. "Depth. 305 meters," someone whispered. The hull moaned like a living thing. Rivets began to pop. Meissner steadied himself against the console. "Maintain angle. Cut all power. No sound, no movement. We'll wait them out." The men obeyed, terrified but disciplined. The engines stopped. The submarine went still, a steel coffin suspended in black water. Above, the British destroyers circled, dropping patterns of charges in widening arcs. One officer frowned. "He's gone silent, sir." The captain stared at the sonar screen where the trace had vanished. "Then we wait. The sea will finish it for us." Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then an hour. The pressure inside U-997 was unbearable. Not from the sea, but from the silence. Men breathed shallowly, afraid even their hearts might make too much noise. Condensation dripped like rain from the pipes. Finally, the sonar operator whispered, "They're moving away." Meissner exhaled, trembling for the first time. "We're still alive," he murmured. "Prepare to rise." Slowly. The engineer turned the valves, releasing compressed air into the ballast tanks. The submarine shuddered, reluctant at first, then began to climb. The pressure eased. Bolts stopped creaking. Hope flickered again. But hope, in war, is treacherous. At 200 meters, a sharp hiss echoed from the stern. A fracture line snaked across the pressure bulkhead, thin at first, then spreading like lightning. "Seal it!" someone yelled, but the steel gave way with a deafening crack. The Atlantic rushed in, the lights exploded, the hull twisted, screaming like metal in agony. In seconds, compartments flooded. Men were thrown into walls, pulled into blackness. Meissner's last words, shouted over the roar, were not an order, but a whisper. "Tell them, the sea took us." Then the Atlantic closed its jaws. On the surface, HMS Dianthus recorded the fading echo. Submarine imploded. Depth unknown. The captain removed his cap, staring out across the calm waves. "God rest them," he said quietly. "They fought like devils." Above him, a thunderbolt passed low, its shadow gliding over the water like a silent requiem. By the end of that week, 5 more U-boats would share the same fate, and the men who once ruled the depths now feared them. The ocean that had sheltered them for years had become their grave. Silence and smoke. October 21st, 1943. North Atlantic, dawn. The sea was deceptively calm, a rolling sheet of gray steel beneath a pale morning sun. A light mist clung to the surface, as if the ocean itself were trying to hide the scars of battle. The convoy moved slowly eastward, a trail of freighters and tankers surrounded by destroyers. On the horizon, faint plumes of smoke marked the places where U-boats had died only days earlier. From the bridge of HMS Biter, an escort carrier of the Royal Navy, Captain Thomas Green scanned the endless water through his binoculars. His breath fogged the glass, and his gloved fingers trembled slightly, not from cold but from exhaustion. For weeks, his task force had been running constant anti-submarine patrols. Day and night, wildcats and Avengers launched from his flight deck, hunting shapes that vanished into the deep before they could be seen. Now, for the first time, the Atlantic was quiet. Too quiet. "Sir," the radar operator called. "No surface contacts. The U-boats are gone." Green lowered the binoculars but didn't smile. "No, Jenkins. They're not gone. They're just bleeding somewhere we can't see." He turned toward the flight deck, where a maintenance crew worked on a Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber. The plane's nose bore the name Ruthless Jane, painted in white letters. The pilot, Lieutenant Jack Ford, was standing nearby, smoking and watching the horizon. He had flown the night before, over the area where U-997 had gone under. One of the young deckhands approached him. "Heard you dropped the last charge, sir. Think you got him?" Ford exhaled a thin stream of smoke. "Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter now. The ocean doesn't give back what it takes." That same morning, hundreds of miles away in Lorient, Germany's once mighty submarine base, the mood was funereal. The air smelled of oil, sea salt, and despair. Inside a concrete bunker, Admiral Karl Dönitz stood before a wall-sized map of the Atlantic. Tiny flags marked lost U-boats, red for confirmed, black for missing. There were too many black ones. A staff officer entered quietly. "Herr Gross-Admiral, reports from BDU. We've lost contact with U-997, U-466, and U-211. None returned to base." Dönitz didn't look up. "That makes 37 this month." "Jawohl." He finally turned, eyes sunken, voice low. "And how many convoys have we stopped?" The officer hesitated. "None, sir." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Dönitz pressed both hands against the map. "Then the war beneath the waves is ending. The hunters have become the hunted." Back at sea, the Allies celebrated, but quietly. Every sailor knew the ocean could turn at any moment. Aboard HMS Biter, Lieutenant Ford prepared for another patrol. The mechanics finished arming the Avenger with 2 depth charges and a 500-pound bomb. The deck crew signaled. Engines roared to life, vibrating through the ship like a living heartbeat. Green's voice came through the radio. "Ford, your sector is west by northwest. Sweep pattern Delta 4. Stay sharp. They're wounded, not dead." "Copy that, sir. Let's see if they're still breathing." The Avenger thundered down the deck, its wheels leaving the steel runway just as the end dropped away into open sea. From above, the Atlantic was beautiful and terrible, vast, cold, endless. Clouds hung low like smoke over a battlefield. Ford's co-pilot, Ensign Peter Hayes, adjusted the radar screen. "Nothing so far. Maybe command's right. Maybe we finally broke them." Ford shook his head. "You don't break men like that, Pete. They just hide deeper." They flew in silence for another hour. Then Hayes spoke again. "You ever think about them? The ones down there?" Ford didn't answer at first. The engine's steady hum filled the cabin. Finally, he said, "Every night. But if we don't do it, they'll torpedo another ship full of kids from Liverpool, or nurses, or my brother." He leaned forward, eyes scanning the empty waves. "This isn't revenge, it's duty." Far below them, what was left of U-541 drifted crippled at 180 meters, its batteries dead, its crew rationing oxygen. Inside, the men moved slowly, conserving breath. The radio operator, gaunt and pale, clutched a cracked microphone. "BDU, this is U-541. Attack failed. Depth charges damaged stern, attempting surface at dusk." The signal never reached Germany. Above, Ford's radar blipped once, faint but distinct. Hayes frowned. "Contact, bearing 183, range 3 miles. Ford banked hard, lining up the attack run. "There you are, you stubborn bastards." He dropped altitude, engines screaming, the Atlantic rushing up to meet him. Through the windshield, he saw it, the gray, battered shape of a U-boat breaking the surface, smoke pouring from its hull. Men scrambled on deck, some waving surrender flags. Others aimed flak guns skyward in defiance. Ford hesitated for a split second, then pressed the release. The depth charges fell, tumbling end over end before vanishing beneath the surface. The explosion was instant. A column of water rose 100 feet high, swallowing the submarine whole. On the flight back, Ford said nothing. The radio crackled with Green's voice. "Good hit, Jack! Another one gone!" But Ford didn't respond. He just stared out the canopy at the endless gray sea. For every kill, he thought, another ghost was born. The Atlantic had gone silent again, but the smoke still lingered. And in that silence, every man knew the ocean was keeping score. The tide turns. November 3rd, 1943. Western approaches. North Atlantic. A cold rain fell in sheets across the convoy lanes. The horizon blurred into an endless wash of gray. Sky and ocean fused together like molten steel. Every man aboard the escort ships knew what that meant. Radar interference, poor visibility, and the kind of weather U-boats thrived in. But this time, something had changed. Aboard the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Bory, Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins leaned over the plotting table, tracing sonar pings that flickered like heartbeats. The crew was on edge. For weeks now, the balance of the Atlantic War had shifted. The wolf packs that once terrorized Allied convoys were bleeding out, one by one. "Contact bearing 145, range 900 yards, the sonar officer called. Hutchins straightened, eyes narrowing. "Bring us in. Ready depth charges, and keep the deck guns manned. These bastards don't die easy." Through the pouring rain, the destroyer's crew caught their first glimpse, a periscope slicing through the waves, then disappearing. "Hard to starboard," Hutchins barked. The ship groaned as it turned, throwing up walls of water on both sides. Seconds later, the first depth charge dropped, vanishing into the sea. The detonation came like thunder under the hull, then another, and another. "Sonar lost contact!" Before anyone could react, the ocean split open. A U-boat breached violently, breaking the surface at a steep angle, smoke and oil spewing from its vents. Men spilled out of the conning tower, some carrying sidearms, others clutching flares. "They're surfacing to fight." "Open fire!" Tracer rounds stitched across the waves. The destroyer's 3-inch guns roared, hammering the sub's deck. But the Germans fired back, a defiant final act of fury. One shell smashed into the destroyer's bow, showering sparks and twisted metal. The two vessels collided, a grinding, catastrophic impact that threw men off their feet. The USS Bory rode up onto the U-boat's hull, crushing its deck under steel. For 30 surreal seconds, the two ships were locked together, grinding, scraping, bleeding into each other like living beasts. Below deck, crewmen scrambled through knee-deep water, sealing compartments and dragging the wounded. Above, the rain mixed with seawater and oil, turning the deck slick and black. One sailor later said it felt like fighting on the back of a dying whale. Hutchins grabbed the railing, shouting through the wind, "Prepare to board!" But before his men could cross, the U-boat slipped free, sliding beneath the waves, disappearing into darkness. Moments later, a violent explosion tore through the sea where it had gone under. Then, silence. The crew stared at the spreading slick of oil and debris. It was over. They had won, but the cost was clear. The Bory's hull was split. She was taking on water fast. Hutchins knew what had to be done. he ordered the crew to abandon ship. They climbed into the freezing lifeboats, watching as their destroyer, the ship that had survived storms, gunfire, and ramming a submarine, finally sank beneath the waves. As she went under, her flag still flew from the mast. Word of the USS Boree's final stand spread quickly through the fleet. To many, it symbolized what the Atlantic War had become, not a fight for conquest, but survival. By December 1943, the statistics told the story. The Allies had sunk 80 U-boats in a single month. Never before had the hunters suffered such losses. For the Kriegsmarine, the message was grim. Admiral Dönitz issued new orders. U-boats were to withdraw from the North Atlantic entirely. The happy time, the era when submarines roamed freely and terrorized convoys, was over. What had changed everything was not a single weapon, but a combination: technology, coordination, and above all, air power. The once invincible wolf packs had met something they could not outsmart: aircraft that could see them day and night, radar that pierced fog, and men willing to fly through storms to protect ships they'd never met. In London, Winston Churchill received the news with relief. He had once said, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." Now, that fear was fading. But in Berlin, Dönitz sat in his bunker staring at a letter from a lost captain's widow. It said simply, "He believed in his duty to Germany. Please tell me it was not in vain." Dönitz folded the letter and set it aside. "It was never in vain," he muttered, though even he wasn't sure if he believed it anymore. Back at sea, the skies were brighter. Convoys began to move without constant alarms. The drone of P-47s and Avengers overhead became the new sound of safety. Lieutenant Jack Ford, still flying from HMS Biter, looked down on one such convoy weeks later. Ships stretched to the horizon, hundreds of them, moving in perfect rhythm. "Hard to believe," his co-pilot Hayes said. "A year ago, this would have been a slaughter." Ford nodded. "Now, it's a march." He banked the plane gently, flying low over the lead freighter. Below, sailors waved their helmets in salute. Ford smiled for the first time in months. He keyed the radio. "This is Avenger 6-1. Convoy secure. No contacts, no threats." Then, after a long pause, he added quietly, "The Atlantic is ours again." As the camera fades, the ocean stretches out, calm, infinite, silent. But beneath that calm, the wrecks of hundreds of submarines lie scattered like ghosts. The war wasn't over yet, but its tides had turned. And somewhere, in the cold, quiet deep, the echoes of engines and propellers still linger, like the last heartbeat of a dying beast.